Hi, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the 11th event in our public lecture series in the Wisconsin Idea Past and Present. This lecture series, as you know, is part of a new course that is being taught for the first time this fall under the auspices of the Department of Sociology at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. My name, as you know, is Chad Allen Goldsberg. I'm a professor in the sociology department, and I have the honor to serve as the instructor for the course this semester. The Wisconsin Idea has always been about more than training students for the workforce. It meant, as Adlai Stevenson once put it, a faith in the application of intelligence and reason to the problems of society, the aspiration to light the way of Wisconsin's citizens and government with the best torches of knowledge and understanding that their university can provide. Accordingly, this lecture series and the course with which it is associated aim to bring students, staff, and faculty in the UW system into a broad conversation with the citizens of the state about how the knowledge produced at the University of Wisconsin has benefited the public in the past and continues to do so today. I encourage you to participate actively through our course website, www.wiscidea.com, and our Facebook page. If you are live tweeting this or subsequent lectures, please use the hashtag #WiscIdea. The sociology department is offering this course with limited resources from our academic and our supplies and expenses budgets. If you would like to contribute to this project to allow us to offer real-time broadcasts or otherwise improve our offerings this semester or in the future, please consider making a contribution to the Department of Sociology Annual Fund. You can do so through the course website, www.wiscidea.com. Before I introduce tonight's speaker, I want to remind you there is no lecture planned for next Tuesday, the week of Thanksgiving recess. The lecture series will resume after the Thanksgiving holiday on November 29th. We are fortunate to continue our series tonight with a lecture by Dr. Paul Robbins entitled "Start with What People Value: Environment, Land, and the Wisconsin Idea." Like all of our speakers, he is graciously donating his time and expertise free of charge out of a commitment to public service. Paul Robbins is the director of the Nelson Institute for Environmental Studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where he guides the institute in serving as a world leader in addressing rapid global environmental change. There, he is spearheading several new initiatives in educational innovation, including the establishment of a professional master's degree in environmental conservation, and he also oversees a rapidly growing undergraduate environmental studies program. Dr. Robbins is also strengthening the Nelson Institute's commitment to the Wisconsin Idea through the expansion of its innovative service learning and internship programs, partnerships across campus, and with outside agencies and organizations, and community programs and public events. Dr. Robbins has years of experience as a researcher and educator, specializing in human interactions with nature and the politics of natural resource management. He has taught topics ranging from environmental studies and natural resource policy to social theory. His research addresses questions spanning conservation conflicts, urban ecology, and environment and health interactions. He has done extensive field work in rural India, where he has focused his work on the politics surrounding forestry and wildlife conservation in Rajasthan, India, as well as recent research examining the wealth of biodiversity, frogs, birds, and mammals, and commercial coffee and rubber plantations throughout South India. Dr. Robbins has also led national studies of consumer chemical risk behaviors in America, including research on the abiding passion of Americans for their lawns and mosquito management policies in the Southwest. In addition, he has studied the complexities of elk management policy on the settled fringes of Yellowstone Park. With writing focused on diverse interdisciplinary audiences and the broader public, he is author of the foundational textbook Political Ecology, A Critical Introduction, and numerous research articles and publications that address conservation science, social science, and the humanities. His award-winning book, Lawn People: How Grasses, Weeds, and Chemicals Make Us Who We Are, is widely recognized as one of the most accessible books on the environmental politics of daily life. Dr. Robbins previously led the School of Geography and Development at the University of Arizona, which he helped establish and served for 2 years as director. A UW-Madison alumnus with a bachelor's degree in anthropology, he also holds a master's degree and doctorate in geography, both from Clark University. He was raised in Denver, Colorado. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Paul Robbins.
I'm testing this now. Thank you, Chad. I want to thank you all for coming out. I want to thank Chad. I want to thank all the organizers behind what is clearly a really good idea. I mean, obviously, the Wisconsin idea you can't take credit for. But the idea that we would bring people out to discuss, experience it in all of its vitality and diversity is a really good idea, Chad. It's a good idea. And to see everybody out here is enormously encouraging, and I'll just do my small bit to add to your knowledge of how things play out in the Wisconsin landscape. What I want to say today is pretty simple, and it comes from years of trying to think about the environment as a problem that we all share, because of course we share it. And that's that if you tell people that the environment is something they share, they're going to ignore you, because it's not what they value. You have to start from what people value. And as it turns out, what they value hinges with enormous consistency on the environment, of course. So in the last instance, we're all citizens of the same Earth. But if you start by telling stories about the planet, you'll have lost more than 1/2 of this state and about just a little less than 1/2 of the country. So you start from what people value. And my sense of that, I'm going to bring a little theory, and then I'm just going to go to the fun stuff, is that we've learned this already across disciplines, across the academy, across K through 12 education. This is not, what I just said is not some kind of revelation. Significant shifts, quoting now from a 2009 article in the journal Teaching in Higher Education by Tessa Hicks Peterson, which I would recommend. Significant shifts are occurring in higher education pedagogy, research, methodology, and community development, ones that value civic engagement and experiential learning as bridges to holistic education and sustainable social change, and I would just add sustainable environmental change, right? Engaged scholarship through university-community partnerships can result in providing a well-rounded education for students, widening of the university's knowledge base, and empowering investment in community change, right? So that's the good news. Yet, perpetuating unequal power relations and contributing to a deficit-based approach of service, so I can translate that for you, that's fancy sociological language for this. You think there's something missing out in the public and you're going to go bring it to them. That approach, Peterson goes on to say, can thwart the social change efforts of community-based education, critically engaging these complex notions while integrating promising pedagogical practices, including MOOCs, is crucial for effective service learning and community-based outreach. What she's saying is, start with what people value. So let's be real for a minute. People don't value the environment. I know, because I run the Institute for Environmental Studies. If the Pew Research poll that's taken every year in 2016 asked people what their highest priorities are. And the environment ranks 13th. Climate change ranks just above gun policy in popularity in this country. So if you lead with that, nobody's going to listen to you. You've got to start with what people value. What do they value? They value jobs. They value health of their children. They value the price of food, the price of small batch hay I learned about one time at a Rotary meeting. That is a big deal for some people. It is. They value ice fishing, a point we will come back to. They value trout streams. And you know what those things all are, right? Those are the environment. But it only works if you start with what people value. So I'm going to give you 3 case examples of things that are going on the campus through the Nelson Institute and its partners across campus, because we're basically a bridge building institution, which are trying to teach us how to listen to communities about what they value, and then translate that back into the powerful research and educational engines that we have on this campus. Rather than, again, am I feeding back? Rather than, again, starting with the science we already have and thinking that we simply need to export it. If we simply show the hockey stick graph on the rate of catastrophic climate change enough times to enough audiences, goes the old theory, there will be a mandate for climate change. A mandate to control climate change. And that theory of social change is so has so demonstrably failed as to be ridiculously archaic, despite the fact that people continue to attempt it. And what I want to suggest is that the Wisconsin idea had it right all the time. If we'd have started with the Wisconsin idea on climate change, we'd be in a totally different landscape now than we are. Case number one. The university year. Now this is a clever idea. Go to a city, any city, and ask them what are the biggest problems that they don't have answers to. And they will give you, trust me, it doesn't matter what the city is. It can be Chicago or it can be Fitchburg, but they will give you a list as long as their arm of problems that they cannot solve because they don't have the staff time, because they don't have the expertise, they can't afford to hire the expertise, or they're frankly too politically hot to handle. They don't want to pay for it, but that there's no mandate to do so. Is that feedback, or is that like a chair somewhere? Oh, that's fine then. Keep squeaking, as long as it's not me. So that's a classic urban municipal problem. And you know, cities have to govern, you know, how long does a city councilor sit? A couple years? How long is a mayor in office? But these problems are existential and long-term for urban growth, for equity, for racial justice, for people aging in place in cities. So how are they going to get the information they need to solve those problems? And of course the answer's got to be the university. The answer always, that's a good answer. I believe in the university. I don't work at a university because I don't think haven't got the answers. On the other hand, if you leave it up to professors to name the problems, they will always get it wrong. Ask the city first. So the university year is predicated, and professors know this. They're not a bunch of arrogant do-nothings. They know the limit of their own knowledge. That's the problem with being a professor, right? You're infinitely ignorant the smarter you get. And so the university year is predicated on this assumption. So what do? You go and you stand up in front of the Monona City Council, which I did a year and a half ago. So now let me tell you, I have talked in front of international audiences at major forums in India and China. Nobody intimidated me more than the Monona City Council. And you stand up in front of the Monona City Council, and I mean that in a good way for them. They are on a tight budget. They've got problems to solve. They do not have time for a lot of nonsense. And you get up in front of them and you say, I've got an idea. List me your problems. Send us your engineering department. Send us the people who do the streets. Send us the people who do the parks. And just give us a list of your problems. And we will go back to the university and we will say, here's some problems. Does anybody have a smart bunch of students and you want to put a class on it? And that's what we do. So this year, the city of Monona is receiving 20 courses dedicated. These are not new courses. They're courses that already existed on the books in social work, in environmental studies, in urban and regional planning, in colleges across the university. It's not something that's just happening in engineering or in L&S. It's across the board, right? And the courses that already exist make as their project topic solve one fraction of one of those problems and return that value to the city. Now we have 20. I begged the city of Monona to give us just a few dollars in a tight budget year to make this happen. They agreed gladly. And one woman who sat on the city council said to me, it's about time that somebody remembered the Wisconsin idea. Now, of course, I'm taken aback. I'm like, I already knew about the Wisconsin idea. But you could see that it wasn't touching her life. And now it was. It's not hard. These are classes that already exist. It's not rocket surgery. This is turning what we do already into something we do much better. So these are all the classes. I mean, they're all over the place. And the topics we're covering, is this the? Yeah, that's the pointer. The topics we're covering include parks and recreation, housing and economic development, connected Monona. They're really concerned about internet connectivity. It's a big issue, right? And then active transportation, how to get people up and moving around and public. They're also interested in aging in place, which I think is a big issue for a lot of the Wisconsin population. So we learned a lot by listening to their list of problems, and these classes are the ones that could work with it. And now we put out an RFP this year and said, who else, are there any other towns around here or cities that are interested? And there are people are lining up to get a piece of the Madison campus. System is thinking about doing this now across System, Oshkosh, Stevens Point, UW-Milwaukee. It's the Wisconsin idea, and it isn't unique to Madison. Okay, so that's example number one. That's easy, actually. Go to a city manager and ask them, like, do you have problems? And they'll just, like, tell you. a list of products. So that's easy. This one's a little harder. Example 2. It involves work of this campus with Wisconsin's Native Nations. You're going to hear more from Aaron Birdbear later in the semester, isn't that right, Chad? So I'm not going to go into great detail. But it's more challenging because it doesn't just involve listening better, something that our tribal communities are quite used to not having happen on the part of the Anglo University community. But it also means you got to respect sovereignty and culture and understand a legacy of failure and frustration that these communities feel with the UW. And they do. They do. This is the era of lack of trust for state institutions, and it doesn't fall to one side of the political spectrum or another. They've got a lot of reasons for grievance. But what can you do? What I can say is that there's a number of UW tribal partnerships that are built on respect and mutual benefit, a majority of which are environmental, along with health. Those are the two issues. If you listen to the tribes, that's what they're most interested in. Sovereign management of their land and the health of future generations. 7 generations, as they are likely to say, thinking forward. So we have a long way to go. So what we did is we just organized a UW Native Nations Summit on Environment and Health back in 2015. We didn't know if anybody'd show up. We didn't know whether, and again, we have every reason to believe people might not. It was on just the 100-year anniversary of an event that was held in 1914 by the tribes of the US. They weren't just Wisconsin tribes. They came to Madison campus, I think that's Lathrop Hall back behind there, and discussed things like getting the vote and getting federal recognition for lands that had been delisted from federal recognition, tribes that had been delisted. So this is on a 100th anniversary. And we asked all the tribal leaders whether they'd come out, and they came out. And they all said the same thing. Let's not wait 100 years to do this again, right? So the Wisconsin idea part of this is to create institutional change based on the same kind of model that we're embracing in the university year, which is to include frank discussions about how UW-Madison is seen in Indian country, some of which centered on institutional shortcomings in engaging Native communities as equal partners, sovereign partners. And in response, the university has begun to take several actions over this last year, just this last year, to foster institutional change. We created a UW Native Nations working group from across the campus and including Extension, of course. Extension is enormously popular in Indian country, even if anthropologists sometimes are not. Blessings to my brothers and sisters in anthropology. I am an anthropologist. Don't send me angry emails. A new campus-wide partnership coordinator position, which is housed in the Nelson Institute, which does liaisons with all the tribes around environmental questions or problems, gets the list, that laundry list of things where we can be helpful in service of those communities. There's a new faculty position, or part of a faculty position, in the School of Human Ecology. Huge shout out to the School of Human Ecology on what they do with Native outreach. They have the highest enrollment of Native Americans on campus, which is a low enrollment campus, Madison, relative to others in system. So there's something to be learned what they're doing, which is what? Community engagement-based, right? Research and education. So what? The Wisconsin idea. And a new position, I think, in UW academic support. So there are real institutional commitments being made, and most of this is about listening. So it begins with listening sessions. The working group held about 8 listening sessions. That includes all the tribes in the state, plus UW Native students, plus urban Indian communities who are sometimes off reservation land, especially in Milwaukee, pretty large populations. So these were held around the state, listening sessions. I think that's a good follow-up for this seminar. And we've asked them, what they wanted, and they tell you. So one of the things they asked for, very practical kinds of things, right? What they wanted was a workshop with the Environmental Protection Agency on something called treatment as state, or as it's called in Indian country, treatment as sovereign, under the Clean Air and Clean Water Acts. And when I heard this, I said, what the hell's that? They knew. I didn't know. So I opened up the Clean Water Act. I've read the Clean Water Act. Like, that's part of my job. But I never noticed. Way down in small print, it says that Native nations with sovereign reservation land can govern clean water and clean air within their borders if they pass a certain level of institutional feasibility. That is, if they're able to monitor and enforce rules and regulations, they are treated as states. Now, politically, that's very attractive to a Native nation. particularly if they're going to share a border with the state that they live in. That's any state in the US. I'm not picking on Wisconsin. That was what they were asking. And why were they asking? Of course they're interested in clean air and clean water. They are dedicated to clean air and clean water. But the vision that they had wasn't just about that. If you were listening right, you understood what it was about. It was about borders and sovereignty and the things that flow across borders. Water flows, in theory, out of the state of Wisconsin, for example, into the state of Illinois and vice versa. When it does so, those two states have responsibilities to one another, legal responsibilities to one another. That's not true if you're not treated as a state as a Native American community. So what we heard in that listening session was, you want to learn how, can we help you? And they said, of course you can. Set us up a meeting with the EPA, bring your own water and air experts, see what you can do. And that was attended by members of most of the tribes of the state, plus several tribes in Minnesota, members of the regional EPA, and UW-Madison faculty. And it would never have happened if we weren't listening, which is the Wisconsin idea. Okay, so there's some other stuff that we've got going on, cooking in this space. We've developed a UW Native Nations Partnership website that is almost live. We just don't want to leave anybody out. This covers almost everything that's going on in student resources or events or partnerships with sovereign nations on things, especially environment and health, but not only. There's stuff in social work. There's a lot going on campus, and we now have a clearinghouse where we can keep people informed. I'm told there are a lot of members of communities out there who don't use the web that often, in which case we're going to now have to pay for some paper versions of this on maybe an annual basis. But again, you don't know that if you don't listen, which is the Wisconsin idea, right? That's the Wisconsin idea. All right, so those are two knotty problems, right? How do you work with municipalities that are underfunded and bored with the university and don't really have time for it? How do you work with Native nations that don't trust the state, don't trust the university, don't trust professors? And the answer both times is listen, right? So now we'll get to the third, and so I'm going to spend the most time on this. Am I okay for time here? I'm going to spend a balance of time on this, and that is climate change. As you will recall from my previous slide from the Pew Research Center, again, people are about as interested in policy on climate change as they are gun control. And I know probably members of this audience are interested in gun control. I am not naysaying you. I am not arguing with you. I'm saying it's not a place people have made progress because it isn't the highest priority on people's lists right now, more than anything else. There's a lot of other reasons. We can talk about them in Q&A. There is all kinds of pushback around climate. It is a very complicated political monster. We are well aware of this. So how do you get people to think about it in ways that connect with their lives? And the answer so far has been from this campus, among others, many others, the Wisconsin Initiative on Climate Change Impacts. And I want to describe this one because I think it follows the principles of the Wisconsin idea. So this is a broad, statewide network that the Nelson Institute launched in partnership with the DNR and all the rest of campus. So there's faculty from forest and wildlife ecology over to engineering, right? In 2007 to identify how changes in Wisconsin's climate are going to impact natural and human systems and work with constituencies on adaptation planning, which is getting ready for change. Because can we be real for a minute? Change is coming. Even if we do everything right now. If we stopped emitting carbon from all sources, from energy to methane coming out of cows, if we stopped all the greenhouse gases today, you've got at least 100 years of resident gas in the atmosphere. It's going to get warmer, and around here, as I will show you, it's going to get wetter. So Wiki, which is what this is called, includes participants from UW Extension, system campuses, state and local government, nonprofits like the Nature Conservancy, and we're doing a lot of outreach now with businesses, and you'll see why. But I'll tell you the story, this happened before I got here. The story on why it took the form it did came from an actual interaction with a legislator back when those occurred. A presentation of a scientist up at the state capitol with members of the legislature said, here's what global warming is, and here's what global change is, and here's what climate change is, and here's how serious it is, and here's why we should pay attention to it. Scientists are good at that. There's the hockey stick graph. There's maps of, big maps of the planet getting warmer, the Arctic ice melting away before our eyes right now. I know Sami communities in northern Finland and Sweden, and their lifestyle is condemned forever. And that's what scientists tell people in the state. But Dale Schultz, who's a Republican state senator at the time, and said, okay, I get it. This is a global problem. But, how does this affect actual people in my district? Not even people in Milwaukee, not people in Madison, people in my district. I actually think that's a good question. I think Dale Schultz asked a really good question. And the scientists who were there, they didn't have an answer. Because how could you? Why, we have global climate change. It's global modeling. We have to think globally. This is a planetary problem. Good God, the end of the world is coming. What does it mean for a farmer? What does it mean for municipalities that have to build out storm sewers in the next 40 years? And so the entire science team, again, I cannot take any credit for this. This came before my time. I believe Greg Mittman deserves credit, and he was director of the Nelson Institute at the time, went back to campus and said, we can't answer that question, can we? And they said, no, but I think we know how. If we can downscale the models using historical meteorological climate data from the state of Wisconsin at high resolution, blessings to the state of Wisconsin, you people keep great data. We have data, we have rainfall data, we have ice on, ice off data, we have snowpack data, we have temperature data going back to the mid-1800s. Somebody was thinking ahead. Why, the Center for Climatic Research is 50 years old. That was when people thought it was going to get cooler. Okay? So my point here is there's a lot of brain power on the campus and there's a lot of data. And scientists love data. So this challenge is fun, right? Can we create decision-ready products that somebody can use in one county of Wisconsin to make different decisions than somebody in another county? Because the variability of climate change within the state, as I will show you, is high. Things are really different in the northwest part of the state than the south. And that's exactly what they did. And then went on a series of listening tours, not speaking tours, where you go around to specific municipalities or specific sectors of the economy and you say, what do you need to know? Here's what we kind of know about generally about what's going on. Throw that spaghetti at the wall and say, what do you want to know more about? I got up in front of Findorf. Maybe I'm not allowed to say that. Yes, it was a lunch brown bag. I wasn't asking for money or anything. Nobody gives us money. I went in front of Findorf and I said, here's what climate change and here's what's happening around the state. And I said, does any of this interest you? And Findorf's a construction company, and a very good one, an extremely responsible one. I thought they were going to say something like, yes, we need to rethink our building materials. That's what I thought we were going to get. Because what do I know about construction? Right, nothing. So I said, what does any of that? He said, go back to slide 5. Okay, slide 5. What is slide 5? I'm going to show you slide 5 in a minute. It shows the frequency of rainfall events and how heavy they are. And I said, why is that important? He said, it's going to change the number of days I bid as rain days for my building contracts, because you have to bid in a certain number of rain. What you're telling me is, I'm bidding wrong. I'm using the past to predict the future, and I'm going to get either outbid or I'm going to wind up with my pants down having underbid the number of days that I'm going to get washed out. I said, that's what you care about? They said, that is what we value, right? And immediately there was some kind of mutual learning went on, right? That's right, that's the wiki vision. That's the idea. So let's take a look. What's really happening in Wisconsin, because the science here is both frightening and exciting, I mean, there are reasons people are climatologists, and if it was that you get depressed easy, there wouldn't be any. It's gonna, backwater discipline back in the 1970s, filled with the greatest minds in the most out-of-the-way buildings. And now they're on television all the time, and people are like threatening them and making fun of them. They're like, when did we become political? Right about here is when they became political. Global temperature anomalies, land temperature anomalies, moving from 1970 forward off the average from 1880 are all in the positives moving forward. We've all seen this. This is the hockey stick graph I just told people. This isn't the hockey stick graph, but this is a version of the warming graph that I told you not to look at. And then you can project based on historical projections. These are conservative projections going forward to the latter part of this century. These are probably more realistic ones. And what you're looking at when you look at these red zones, right, is 5 degrees centigrade warming, possibly in the worst case scenarios, 5 degrees in West Africa, over current temperatures. Somebody do the conversion to Fahrenheit. I don't speak Fahrenheit. It's unbelievable, right? We're talking about a massive shift in the way the planet functions. And it shouldn't surprise you then when you get the purple zone. This is why the Sami reindeer herders are deeply concerned. Their way of life is, the permafrost is already is already melting. And we're dealing there with 7.5 degrees over the course of the century. Good God. But if you look at that, what does Wisconsin look like? Oh, here's rainfall, which is really complicated. I mean, temperature, you know, you can kind of understand. Rainfall is enormously complex. So you can see in inches of liquid water per year off the current rainfall gauge as coming in at like 60 inches greater in the Pacific. And, right, over the Amazon, a decrease of like 10 degrees. Throughout the Southwest, decreases in long-term droughts, deserts that are already deserts. I lived in Tucson. It's a stinking desert. You take another, I don't know, 10 inches of rainfall out of the system, it doesn't rain. It just doesn't rain for years. The problem with, so what's my point is things are going to change, right? That's just going to happen. We can slow the curve. We can do all kinds of things about mitigation. But the decision was made on this campus that we're going to start with adaptation because people in Wisconsin want to be able to make decisions about the future. Then, once we've had a conversation in which everybody agrees that things are changing and that we're making decisions, it's a lot easier to say that global warming is real because they're already making decisions about it, right? But you can't do it if you try to pick Wisconsin out of this map. Global projections, global data just don't tell you anything you need to know if you live in Milwaukee or if you live in Bayfield, because that's what it looks like, right? This is a global model at a pretty much a typical resolution as they're run on most campuses. And what Madison did at the request, right, of a Republican state legislator, was to begin to downscale that to a 5-kilometer grid scale and project it forward. Decision-ready science. So I'm going to give you some historical and some future projections for Wisconsin. This is actual observed change between 1950 and 2006 in the seasons of the year. And what you're seeing is we're observing, there's a little bit of cooling in the fall, at least up in the Northeast. But for the most part, you're seeing warming throughout most of the year. And what's interesting is it falls heavily in the winter and heavily in the Northwest. So who skis the Berkey? Yeah, well, you better get in now while you have the chance.
They're already trucking in the snow.
So, right. So here we are, right? But on the other hand, decisions that are made in Milwaukee in terms of temperature at different points of the year are going to be different than the ones they need to make in Bayfield. Decision-ready science, right, for people. Here's another bit of historical data, which I always find shocking, and I love to show upstate because there's so many ice fissures. This is John Magison's data set of days on ice on Lake Mendota, which has been observed since 1850. These are the number of days, in other words, it's frozen between the freeze up and the thaw, right? There's an official number of days. And you can see that the 10 longest, which fall around the 125 mark or greater number of days of ice on Lake Mendota, all came before the turn of the last century. And that most of the shortest days, with this most recent one in the early 2000s being ridiculously short, right? Like a month of ice. Those all happened in the last decade or two. And we've lost about 19 days of ice in the last 100 years. We'll probably lose another month. This isn't rocking. Again, not news to most people who are ice fishers. And when I ask ice fishers, they say, yeah, right. What's the university going to do about it? And I think that's a good question. But first, we have to all admit that, that this is what's happening. And of course, what we've learned in the several political cycles on all sides of the spectrum is that you're allowed your own politics, and you're allowed your own facts even in this era. But you can't talk it out of snowing, or talk it into raining, or talk a 95-degree day into an 85-degree day. And that's why ice fishers are great, because they know how long the ice is on, and their parents ice fished before them. That's what you want to ask people. How is this going to impact what I value, right? So, this is a change in annual precipitation, very complicated, from 1950 to 2006. Much more rainfall down here, increases in rainfall, drier seasons up. This is precipitation, so I assume it includes snowpack, I'm not quite sure. But this is, again, off the average, so off the historic average. All right, and then there's extreme weather events that we've seen a lot more of. 178 record-breaking extreme weather events in 2012. Everybody remembers that year, the year practically without a winter. Heat burst, this flooding in 2016. There's a second rule. I said you can't talk it out of snowing or raining, right? Or talk it into snowing or raining. That's a good rule of thumb. Another good rule is that flooding happens in suburban Milwaukee as much or as often as it happens on the Bad River Reservation. So these are equally, it's like the way people worry about Zika. It is a very evenly distributed kind of problem. Now that doesn't mean everybody is as well insulated or insured. There is horrific climate unevenness and vulnerability in working class African American and Latino populations relative to wealthy Anglo populations. We could talk all about that all day, but there is still the same, we're still stuck within proximity to each other in a changing context. So here are our projections at the state level moving forward from 1980 to 2055 based on, again, downscaling the models and then using our really, really highly resolved data. And that's that it's going to get warmer, 4 to 9 degrees Fahrenheit by the mid-21st century. And the mid-21st century is upon us. I have a 7-month-old son, and I'm not investing in snowshoes. And it's seasonally and geographically highly varied. Where do you get the more extreme temperature change? That is the largest amount of warming off of the historic average. You get it in the Northwest, again. You get it in this part of the state, and you get it in winter. So who should be interested in this? It seems to me that people who make snowblowers should be thinking about making ATVs. It is as simple as that. That these things are real, they have business implications, they have implications for insurance, and the idea of Wiki is to begin with people's business plans and work backwards to the kinds of information they need to make decisions. The number of days in which the temperature is likely to exceed 90 degrees Fahrenheit, this is the number of days it increases over the present, is pretty heavy in the south. So in other words, the number of days over 90 degrees is going to increase by a couple of weeks, right, by the mid to late part of the century. And rainfall is the most interesting part. Having, again, come from Arizona, there's one good side to all this. It's going to get wet. It's going to get much wetter. Precipitation is going to go up throughout the state, and especially in the Northeast. The problem is it's going to come in the kind of extreme events that we've seen, 2 inches or greater in 24 hours. So real gully washers, you know? Now, why does that matter? If you are Kevin Schaefer, who runs the municipal sewerage district for Milwaukee, it means you're going to have to figure out a way to get away from something like 220 combined sewer overflows, which they were looking at about 15 or 20 years ago. What is a combined sewer overflow? It's when it rains so hard that the capacity of your sewer is not enough to keep poo from going into Lake Michigan. All right? And these were happening day after day after day. And with extreme events, they're going to happen more often. So what did Milwaukee do? It built a century of increased capacity into the Milwaukee sewerage district, not just to handle present flows, but to handle the kinds of flows that we're going to see in this state over the next 50 years. It was a really responsible decision. They bought land upstream that can soak in, and left it as green space, that can soak in that flow. They increased the overall capacity. They put in porous surfaces and sidewalks, because they know what? It's going to rain. And once you know that, you know what kinds of data you can give them, at what kinds of resolution, and what you can ask the climate scientists to do to help them. Because what? You listened, which is the Wisconsin idea, right? So on top of all that, and I've just sort of gone, I'm off script. What the hell? We began to also work with other sectors. We have a wiki website that you can visit that's updated, and we do workshops with people and municipalities around the state. Again, we're really trying to crack the business community who is interested in this. I am talking to people who manufacture air conditioners. But municipalities are really where the action's at, and counties. La Crosse has an entire climate adaptation plan written through a workshop with the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and I'm sure some La Crosse faculty as well. Wisconsin Idea listening sessions, which turn back into decision-ready science products that go out into the public. Dane County has got a climate risk assessment program. They are ready for, this is, what you're looking at here is difference of annual average countywide temperature over the upcoming period, over the next couple of decades. And of course, with the urban heat island and everything else, it's going to get a lot warmer around here. And that's important to plan for. And Dane County's got a climate plan. But it isn't just with municipalities, and it's not just with the Anglo community. We're working with Red Cliff Band of the Chippewa and Ho-Chunk and the Oneida Nation with these same products, listening to what their priorities are. Obviously, Red Cliff has a deep investment in their fisheries work and the maintenance and management of the fisheries. They have a terrific hatchery up there, which is really stellar if you ever get a chance to see it. Ho-Chunk has different needs and different plans in the southern part of the state. So it's not like every Indian community is the same. These are sovereign nations, and they all have different, very, very different economic needs and are facing really different kinds of decisions. Trout fishers are interested in these data because if you warm up the air, you tend to warm up the streams. And if you warm up streams, you don't get trout. And if you don't get trout, basically the already deeply economically challenged, most beautiful part of the state, the driftless zone, is facing a loss of one of its most important fisheries and one of its most important sources of income. So here, Trout Unlimited, right, which is, this isn't exactly the crazy green lefty lobby. These are anglers. These are serious fishing people. And they want to know what DNR can do to meander the streams, to shade them in. Which streams do you work on when you only have a certain amount of money? Do you work on them all? Can only be answered by mapping at high levels of resolution climate change data. Do you know to map fisheries this way if you don't ask? No, you don't. You got to ask the trout people. And there's the Berkey, which I threw in here, but I've already sort of tipped my hand on that one. That race brings 20,000 people to Sawyer County. It has a $4 million impact on the local economy, right? But over the last 60 years, the average winter temperature in the area has increased more than 3 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's not projections. That's not mad scientists making stuff up. That's not models that somebody doesn't trust. That's just like, again, those aren't even facts. They're just temperatures. And that is a serious challenge. You say there, again, snowmaking, shipping in snow. Right. So what did we do? A UW class, or set of classes, interviewed people from around outdoor recreation groups and local businesses to see how the loss of snow has been affecting their businesses, right? Trying to understand the economic impact of climate change and then to think about how to mitigate it, how to invest in alternatives, and that kind of thing. And they found, again, that the race has been canceled or moved further north, and there has been a concomitant decrease in local sales. So again, we're talking about adaptation, but in the process, right, what you're doing is you're enrolling a community based on what they value to understand climate change and not wag your finger and tell them they're a bunch of deniers and get into your corners and squat there, right? If the university serves the public, it serves the whole public. The Wisconsin Heat Vulnerability Index is especially important in Milwaukee for poor communities. Studies of heat waves in the past have shown not only are poor and older people killed in heat waves, which will be the greatest increase in cause of death in the United States from climate change, but that it is African American communities, even controlling for income, that are differentially vulnerable. There's a guy, Kleinenberg, he's a sociologist. He studied morgue data to get this. And there are reasons for that we could go on to, but it means adapting to climate change means increasing social networks, creating opportunities for people to get out of the heat. It means a lot of things that have nothing to do with climate change. It means urban infrastructure and basically an environmental justice question, all right? There's a number of other things, blah, blah, blah. Okay, I'm going to close because I'm at about 40 minutes. So what we've learned through all these examples, right, is that the key isn't to talk to people about climate change or the environment. I mean, my biggest problem is that I run something called the Institute for Environmental Studies, which is a huge barrier to working with people to solving problems, frankly. It should just be called the Institute of Studies. And because everything's the environment. And in that sense, that's what it's going to have to be. So it's about transforming the university and transforming environmental studies in a fundamental way so that it can reach people, knowing that this is a complex political environment where facts are manufactured and there's all kinds of other things going on. You can talk about that all you want in Q&A, but I'm saying that knowing that is insufficient. So when we did run a massive open online course, about which I was skeptical, Chad, I don't want to put professors out of business with like all kinds of free education, but we were asked to do it by the university. And I was sitting in a bus in Shanghai. I was on my way to a meeting with you. And I was sitting in a bus in Shanghai with a couple of faculty who know about Aldo Leopold and the land ethic and the tradition of conservation on this campus. They're experts in it. And I said, what if we did a MOOC, a massive open online course? What should it be about? You know, should it be about how to restore your prairie? Yeah, all right, we'd get 75 retired landowners and a couple of interested farmers. Okay, no, all right. It should be about, we could do it about water resources. Okay, that would bring out, some of the fishermen. Now we're at a few hundred, right? And Tim Van Deelen, a shout out to my colleague in Forest and Wildlife Ecology, said, no, make it about hunting. 6,000 people from around the state and the world took a class on Aldo Leopold, the land ethic, ethical responsibility for management of the land, everything that we know that most people in this room are already dedicated to, right? And it went out to 6,000 hunters, right? And some people who weren't hunting before. Now, did I get any earful from a handful of people who think that shooting anything is evil, wrong, and guns are bad? Yes, of course I did. And that's good. There should be an argument. The point here is we had the ear of 6,000 people, and they all read Sand County Almanac. And that strikes me as more important than almost anything else we could have done. And it was really because I listened to Tim Van Deelen, who is a hunter. And that is the Wisconsin idea. Thanks. I'd take questions.